Alright everyone, how are you today? We've reached Thursday, we're now just a couple of days away from Celtic's big return and we've got things to chat about today. Things to discuss based on a couple of comments I got in on yesterday's video, raising talking points that I thought we could get into, and a few other bits of news as well. It was another defeat last night in the UEFA Women's Champions League for Celtic. 3-0 loss at Stamford Bridge against Chelsea. Watched the highlights earlier. Bit of a one-sided affair. The team were pretty much up against it from the start of the game. We lost a goal after 1 minute. Lucy Bronze scored. It was a pretty good volley. Goalkeeper should probably have done better, but it was a pretty good strike. She's probably a name that a lot of you will know. She's an 126-time England cap, so that's just a flavour of what Celtic were up against last night and last week against a team like Chelsea. Real step up for the team in the Women's Champions League, and you hope they're learning from these experiences, even though we've lost all 4 games so far. A couple of games left. We've got Real Madrid and Hamilton, which is a hell of a sentence to say. And then we go to FC 20 in our final match. So can we pick up a point over those couple of matches? I think it's going to be pretty tough. As I say, just a hell of a step up. But great we're there. In other news, Christmas is coming. That's not the actual news here. Celtic's annual film is the news. That will be out later today. Celtic teased it yesterday and said that it's actually their 10th year of doing this, and I was a bit surprised about that. I didn't realise it was such a fairly recent thing. I just thought it was something the club had always done. Had visions of Martin O'Neill doing various occupations and Henrik Larsson doing silly stuff at Christmas time, but it only started in 2015, I think, and Celtic posted a video yesterday with all of the various highlights from the other year. So what can we expect this year? We'll find out later today. They usually release it in the morning, don't they? So you probably won't have too long to wait from this point. Also, just a wee update on Lennon Miller, the most talked about young player in Scotland at the moment. Not totally clear if he's someone who Celtic are actively looking to sign, but we clearly have some sort of interest in him and are watching him play at the moment. The Scottish Sun say we scouted him during Tuesday's Scotland versus France under-19s international in Falkirk. Celtic weren't alone in scouting Miller during that game. Our representatives were joined by those from Rangers, Manchester United, Manchester City, Chelsea, Liverpool and Aston Villa. So some of the top clubs in the UK watching Lennon Miller, and Rangers as well. He captained Scotland in the 0-0 draw. He played around 70 minutes of that game. So he's definitely someone we're keeping an eye on, but time will tell whether he's actually someone that we move for. I would suggest, looking at our midfield options at the moment, that it would be a position that we don't really need to strengthen in. I mean, we have 5 really top midfielders at the moment. But, looking at next season, potentially, could someone leave? I think if you're looking at who could potentially leave, Reo Hatate might be the one you'd be looking at, just because he's been at Celtic. I think by that point, will it be 3.5 seasons? And potentially he'd look to move on at that stage. Maybe not, but he's kind of the only one I could see moving on. Obviously, if and when he leaves the club, he'll take a hell of a lot of creativity with him. And Lennon Miller certainly appears to have a similar game in terms of being able to play those passes that unlock defences. So maybe that's what we could see next summer. Certainly Lennon Miller is someone we should keep an eye on. Right, just while we're talking about Hatate and on the general Japanese theme, did get this comment in yesterday from Jim Conlon saying, I can't understand why we haven't been back to the Japanese market. Players don't cost the earth. And I thought that was an interesting point that I could take a look at on today's video. Now, we've signed 6 players from Japan in recent years. Tomoki Iwata was the most recent of them back in early 2023. Yuki Kobayashi also joined that month. 3 windows have passed since that point. No more J-League players have joined. I know we have been to Asia since then. We signed Yang and Kwon. Not the summer there, but the one before when Brendan Rodgers just arrived at the club. I think looking at our Japanese signings, as I say, 6 of them so far, generally you would look at it and say it's been fantastic value. The main 3, Kyogo, Reo, Daisen, still some of our most important players today. I think all 3 of them are in Celtic's best team, and they cost a combined £7.5 million according to various reports, which, let me just repeat that: Kyogo, Reo and Daisen. No idea why I'm calling them by their first names now. I think it's because Kyogo is known as Kyogo and the other 2 aren't really known as their first names, which always kind of annoys me for some reason. Anyway, the 3 of them signed for £7.5 million, which is ridiculous value given what they've shown for the club, and it just shows the kind of value that is on offer for us shopping in Japan. So I guess the big question would be, why haven't we gone back into that market over the past 3 transfer windows? Well, I guess the obvious difference would be the fact that Brendan Rodgers is now the manager, and it's clear that he doesn't have the same connection with Japanese football that Ange Postecoglou did. Now, as I understand it, I think it's fairly well known that the signings we made from Japan during Ange's time at the club were based on his personal experience. So, like, he'd obviously coached Daisen before. I think he coached Tomoki Iwata previously at Yokohama Marinos. He'd gone up against Reo Hatate, and I think he spoke about that openly the day that Hatate and Mitoma from Brighton tore his Marinos team apart while playing for Nah, it's gone. Kawasaki Frontale. Very well done if you managed to get that. Ideguchi and Kobayashi, not sure about Ange's connection with them. I remember Ideguchi scoring a goal for Japan against Ange's Socceroos. So again, it might have been someone he was well aware of. But I think there was a fair bit of personal experience used for each of those signings from Japan. And obviously, Ange no longer there, so we no longer have that at our disposal. I think the summer just there under Brendan Rodgers, where we've looks like we've had a pretty good summer window. We tended to look at a lot closer to home for our signings. So Kasper Schmeichel, Vujami Sinizalo, Adam Ida, Austin Trusty, all known from English football. Luke McCowan, even closer to home. Paulo Bernardo, we obviously knew really well from his loan last season. And Alex Valle and Arnie Engels, where we didn't necessarily know them, they both came from clubs in top 5 European leagues. I think when you compare that to the previous summer, when we signed players from Norway, Australia, South Korea, Poland, Sweden, Greece, and none of those signings have worked out, it's fair to say, looking at them all. So I'm not sure if the club were potentially scarred from that last year. I think there was definitely a change in the transfer approach this year. Obviously, Mark Law's moved on. Seems like Brendan Rodgers has been a good bit more involved in the signings we've made this year. And it may just be that he prefers signings from Europe and specifically England, looking back at his tenure at the club, rather than those from Japan. So I don't know necessarily if we will see Celtic going back to Japan for any players. I think it'd be a shame if we didn't, because as I've already said, I think if you look at the very top players in Japan, Maeda, Kyogo, Hatate, we also had Tomoki Iwata could be kind of seen as a top player in Japan when we signed him. I think those signings were pretty good in the main. Certainly Hatate, Maeda, Kyogo have been. It's maybe when you look a little bit lower and more projecty signings like Kobayashi and Ideguchi, who always felt a bit more of a punt. That's maybe where the club didn't get it right, buying players from Japan. So generally, what am I saying? I think it's a good market for Celtic, but I'm not necessarily sure whether the club will be going back for players from Japan anymore. It seemed over the last window that we've gone a lot closer to home. To be honest, in January as well, Kun and Ida joined, a bit closer to home. And it may just be that the Japan thing was an Ange thing because of his personal experience. I think that'd be a shame if that was the case, because even prior to Ange and prior to Kyogo, etc., we had Japanese players at the club. Nakamura and Mizuno, I guess, as well. And they're always really popular figures at Celtic, and I'd love to see that continue. But yeah, as I say, 3 windows have passed and we've not moved for any players. And there's not even really been any talk of us moving for any players. There's clearly good players available in Japan. But yeah, that's my take on the situation. I'm not sure you'll see us signing players from Japan in January or next summer. As I say, I hope I'm wrong. It's a Celtic AGM tomorrow. Don't know if you're aware of that. It definitely crept up on me. We'll be covering all of the wonderful stuff. It's always riveting stuff that comes out of that it'll actually be Saturday's video, because obviously tomorrow morning it won't have happened by that stage. Also got this comment in from Erin Jack saying, I like this type of video, that bit more analytical. I'd also enjoy a video maybe breaking down the UCL probabilities based on our form, current standing and coefficient. I saw on UEFA's website that we have only a 3.2% chance of not qualifying in the playoff spots. Not sure exactly what you've seen, Erin. Certainly I've been following the works of Football Meets Data. I'm not sure if any of you have been. They basically look at various possibilities and probabilities in European football. And their current projections give us a 91% chance of making the top 24. Pretty good chance of that happening based on that. And also a 15% shot at finishing in the top 8, which seems like a bit more of an outside chance. They also say that there is a 50% chance of 10 points being needed for a top 24 spot. That's just based off the results at the moment. I think there's been like a surprisingly and notable low number of draws so far in the competition, and that's basically contributed to potentially a higher threshold needed for a top 24 spot. So a 1 in 2 chance that it will be 10 points required for top 24, 34% chance that 9 will be enough, and a 9% outside shot that we might need as many as 11. Obviously we look good for 11 points because we've got 7 already with 4 matches to go, and with that in mind it's easy to see why we've got a 91% chance of making the top 24. So obviously we're looking very good for that. So understandably people are already looking up the table. I know some people are saying, oh, maybe we should be going for a top 8 spot. I still think that's a bit unrealistic, to be honest. When we're talking about Celtic here, and I love Celtic and we're a huge club, but in terms of the team, when you're going up against like the very top teams in Europe, I think finishing in the top 8 of the Champions League is like a bit unrealistic. As good as we've been, I think we just need to calm down slightly. I think a top 16 spot is certainly something we should be aiming for. And if we manage to finish in the top 16, that'd be particularly notable. It would mean we'd have the second leg of our knockout tie at Celtic Park. If you finish 9th to 16th, second leg at home. If you finish 17th to 24th, second leg away. I know people may debate whether that's even an advantage, having the second leg at home. I'd say you'd rather have it than not. We know how good Celtic can be at Celtic Park. So we're currently 15th in the Champions League table. We've played what looks like our tougher half of fixtures, generally speaking. So I don't think there's any reason why we shouldn't be targeting the top 16. Once you get to the knockout rounds, assuming we get there, and I know there's still work to be done, this is what you're looking at. I've stolen this graphic from ESPN, and it shows how the knockout rounds of the competition will work. Now, basically, it's a bit like a tennis tournament with teams being seeded. You know how, for example, Carlos Alcaraz and Yannick Sinner often can't meet until the final of a competition because of the top 2 players. Just like that in the Champions League, the first and second team from the league stage won't be able to meet until the final. Now, UEFA will still do some type of draw to decide exactly where each team goes. That's why in this graphic, there's like a 1/2 there in dark blue on the left-hand side. And then over on the right-hand side, there's a 2/1. But for example, if Celtic were to finish 16th in the league phase, we'd then face either 17th or 18th in the knockout round. If we won that, we'd then go on to play first or second in the last 16. Obviously, Beyond that, you're getting a little bit greedy, but that's generally how the knockout round is going to work. So there's not going to be like a draw necessarily like there has been in previous years. There is still clearly going to be to some extent because they need to sort out that 1-2, 2-1 thing. But generally speaking, you're going to know roughly what your path is, and that's why finishing as high up the league table as possible is brilliant for the club. So yeah, that's where we're at. Amazing to even be able to chat about stuff like that. I'm going to head for now. Back tomorrow, properly looking ahead to our trip to Tynecastle. I'll be joined by a familiar face, a big name from Celtic YouTube, and we'll see you all then.